Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's Point-Counterpoint. I am Dr. Barrett, and I am here with Dr. Tanya Paynter. We are going to talk today about dairy. And on Point-Counterpoint, we like to bring out differences of opinion about common hot topics in neurology and headache prevention. Because there are a lot of different ways to go about many of these topics. I am an MD, conventionally trained, and Dr. Paynter is a naturopath. And so sometimes these different traditions have the same perspective, sometimes they have different perspectives. So today we would like to talk a little bit about dairy, which I think can be a big challenge for people to figure out whether or not they should go dairy-free or not to help their headaches. So there are a couple of different issues at work here. So first of all, if you are allergic to dairy or don't digest lactose well, then definitely avoid it. Any food sensitivity that you know you have or that has been shown on food testing, yes, definitely avoid it. It's going to create inflammation in your body, which then can cause some of the inflammation associated with migraine, and it definitely makes things worse from the migraine perspective as well as a whole body perspective. I was working with a patient recently who had a dairy sensitivity and refused to go dairy-free. She's young. She hasn't figured it out yet. It's okay. But she just kept arguing with me about, yeah, but it's really hard. I'm like, I know.
Hey, I'm old and I still struggle with going dairy-free. So I hear that.
I get it. I get it. And she's like, but I can't eat pizza with my friends. It's like, I get it. It's hard. So we wanted to really clarify some of the issues around going dairy-free, who might want to really consider it. I'm just going to say up front, if you have a known dairy sensitivity, yes, go dairy-free. I'm sure you would agree, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, got it. Okay. And the second issue, the reason that I am probably a little bit more flexible about the no dairy thought within the migraine community than other people is because yogurt is one of the most common food sources of probiotics. Gut health is intimately correlated with brain health. And what we know is that we need those probiotics in things like yogurt or kefir. And for many people, that's the only source of probiotics that they get. They're not eating some of the other types of fermented foods. And so I feel like it's an easy to access source of probiotics, which we need. We can certainly get low sugar varieties of all of these products. And since that's easy and cheap, that for many people, if they don't have a dairy intolerance, it's really worthwhile keeping dairy on board so that there is that easily available probiotic form. So what do you think?
Well, I don't disagree with you. Anytime we can do food as a source of nutrients, like I'm all about that. The problem that I often see is, and we'll take yogurt as a specific dairy example, since that's what you mentioned, is that dairy is high in histamine. So histamine can be a major problem for a lot of people. And as you well know, and I'm sure that most of the people listening are probably aware of that as well. But so we like to kind of switch away from dairy and look at some non-dairy options when we're first getting started on trying to figure out what's causing migraines for certain people. And so when we're doing that, we're kind of paying attention to the other higher histamine foods as well. So if we're seeing a pattern of multiple foods that are contributing to that high histamine piece, we definitely want to make sure that we're away from the yogurt and the dairy that has higher histamine. And another way that you can kind of tell, is this something that you should be a little bit more worried about, is if you take Benadryl or Zyrtec or any of those antihistamines as part of your cocktail to help with a migraine, and or that those medications really help to cut down on the pain, histamine is going to be an issue for you. If you have a diagnosis of MCAS, multiple mast cell activation syndrome, things like that, lots and lots of seasonal allergies year-round, environmental things, we know that histamine is a problem. So that's going to be a food that you're going to want to stay away from because of the histamine component to it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So we've got definitely pros and cons on various parts of dairy here. If you tolerate histamines, then yogurt and kefir can be a good source of probiotics for you. If you know that you don't tolerate histamines, then maybe avoid those foods, but it's for the histamine issue as well as the dairy issue.
Yeah.
Does that sound like a good
One of the
summary?
other Oh, yeah, it is good. But I think that I will also kind of throw in the fact that with dairy and in yogurt in particular, there are some inflammatory properties to it based on how the cow is raised, whether it's organic and grass fed. So much as, somebody might have heard about the importance of grass fed beef over conventional grown beef because of the inflammatory properties of conventionally grown meat versus the grass fed free range meat. I mean, there's a huge difference. And clinically studied, the amount of omega-3 fatty acids found in grass-fed free-range beef is far superior to conventionally grown, right, where they're just stuck in pens. So we know that that plays a role in the inflammatory properties of our dairy as well. So when you're looking at, wanting to stay with dairy, if you can find options like cheeses, yogurts, things that are from a grass-fed free-range cow, that's going to have a lot less inflammatory properties than one that's, milked from a conventional standpoint where they don't really get out and roam around, right? So that can be another important point. And if I may, I'd like to kind of talk a little bit too about some of the harder cheeses, because, dairy as a whole, so we find that the fermented products are what usually have the higher histamine things. And, Dr. Barrett and I were talking just before we pressed record that, there are lots of foods that have good probiotics for us to build up our gut bacteria and to support healthy gut activity. The problem though, is that all of those foods are fermented and fermented foods are high in histamine. So if you have a histamine issue, there tends to be a problem with the gut as a reason why you have a histamine issue, but you can't have the food probiotics to help heal that gut problem that's leading to the histamine because of the high histamine food. It's just like this horrible circle, right? So it's important to kind of understand that in that situation, we would want to do some sort of an oral supplemental probiotic. But you have to be really careful because even some of the most common supplemental probiotics are containing bacteria that are prohistamine. They help to increase histamine and produce histamine in the gut. So your safest bet when you do have a histamine problem is to go with a soil-based probiotic. There's a handful of them out there now. A lot of research that show that these actually do a better job of repopulating our gut anyway. They're very nutritive to our gut lining. They help us to produce and break down vitamins and nutrients that we need from our food. So really good source of probiotics are the soil-based. But then back to the harder cheeses and dairy and things. And one of the reasons why we choose to, again, kind of switch away from that towards more non-dairy options is the tyramine content. So a lot of people are aware that high tyramine foods are also triggers for migraines because of how they can lead into the production of some of our neurotransmitters that can stimulate a migraine. So the harder cheeses, they tend to be better tolerated by a lot of people, but they are higher in tyramine. So if you know that that's a problem for you, then again, we're going to want to avoid the tyramine piece with the harder cheeses, although they tend to be less in the histamine than the yogurt and the other fermented food. So lots of nuances to even just something as simple as dairy, yes or no, right? There's never an easy answer when it comes to migraines. Should we do this or that? Well, it depends. That's always the answer, right? It depends.
Yeah. And I think the important thing is that it needs to be individualized to the person who's trying to make this decision. You have to look at multiple factors in order to make a really good recommendation about what's right for them.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, part of the reason that it's better to work with somebody than to just try to figure out these answers on Google, because Google doesn't know you and your situation and can't give the same kind of thoughtful answer that is going to really help you move the needle on your own migraines.
Yeah, that's so true. And there's such conflict. I mean, just as we were talking, right? We each have a bit of a different idea about whether dairy should be or should not be included in a diet for migraine. But I think we both can agree that it depends on the person, right?
Yeah.
Dairy can be excellent to continue to eat. It's a good source of a lot of nutrients and protein, and it's a quick snack idea in a population of people who already tend to restrict way too much because everything triggers a migraine, right? So I think, yeah.
Yeah, and that is exactly part of the reason that I don't typically recommend that people go dairy-free just for the migraines. If they have an allergy, yes, for sure. If they don't, I don't typically recommend it because I just don't see it being a huge lever to push. I mean, we only have so much bandwidth trying to deal with chronic health problems. And I really think it's important to steer people towards the thing that are going to give the biggest outcome. Like if we could all spend all our time on our health, that would be great.
Yeah, right.
But we can't. We've got to cook dinner for the kids and get them to dance practice and then maybe say hi to our partners,
Yeah, that's right.
so many things to do. And so I really think it's important for people to spend their time on the things where if they push that lever, they're going to get the biggest result. And I just have not seen dairy be much of a big needle mover for people in getting them to headache free. So that's another reason that I typically don't. And like you were saying, so many people are restricting so many foods anyway, because it's the only way that they have encountered to control their headaches. It's one of the only things that's out there in the popular press is eat this, don't eat that. So people are like, okay, I'm going to get rid of these headaches. I'm going to stop eating all of it. And I can't tell you how many people I end up seeing with eating disorders or malnourished when we check their nutrient levels. Because they're just working so hard to get the headaches gone. And I think they're putting a lot of time and energy into things that aren't really going to move the needle for them.
Yeah. And, definitely one of the things that I tend to see, again, I do like to kind of take it out and then we add it back in, right? So we like to kind of do a complete, because it's really hard to, unless you're going out there and you're only buying cheeses that are grass fed, which really, there are not a lot of options out there. Like I've tried myself and I finally gave up. But so there's a lot of that effort that's being put into it too. So one of the things that we do, and it sounds like you maybe are the opposite, where we eat it and you remove it if you determine that that's going to be a problem. We take it out and then add it back in to determine if it's going to be a problem. Because one of the things that we see is that if you eat it constantly, your body has just kind of a low level response to it. But when you take it out and your body kind of calms down from that constant exposure, then when you reintroduce it, it flares out big time again, right? And so then it's a very obvious, oh, this is actually not good for me. So we tend to take it the other direction. Dr. Barrett sounds a little nicer and not having to eliminate it right away, right? But one thing that I would also say that is a big thing, if you have any skin issues like psoriasis, eczema, hives, things like that, that usually what we see from a naturopathic standpoint, anything relating to the skin, dairy and gluten tend to be the top two foods that will contribute to a skin condition. So anytime, if somebody comes in and they've got skin issues, but, their main complaint is migraine, but then they've also got skin issues, the first thing we're going to do, okay, let's switch away from gluten grains and add in other non-gluten grains, right? That's the important thing. We don't want to eliminate anything. We want to switch away from the inflammatory or potential problems and switch to something more anti-inflammatory, right? So when we're taking dairy out, we want to make sure that we're adding other sources of protein and calcium in, right? So that switching is really important. So I would love to just untrain elimination completely. Like, let's take elimination out of the food conversation and let's more talk about switching something away from something to something else, right? We take something away, we add something in.
Yeah. Just psychologically, that's so much better.
And then we come from an abundant mindset as opposed to a scarcity mindset. And it becomes so much easier to figure out how to eat on, and then we can get our nourishment from other areas besides what we're used to just thinking of as our grain is gluten, is flour, but we've got all kinds of other options that we can look at too. But I'm digressing a little bit. But when you're trying to evaluate, should I or shouldn't I try this dairy switch idea? If you have skin issues, then absolutely. If you haven't tried the dairy-free option yet, I would encourage you to at least give it a month. and then try adding it back in. And if anything flares, if your migraine comes roaring back, if your skin was getting better and now all of a sudden it's flared up again, if you had constipation and it was better and now you're having constipation again, whatever it is, if something flares after you reintroduce it, that's a pretty good indicator that that is going to be an inflammatory food for you that you're sensitive to. You just didn't know it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And along those lines of your switching, I mean, there are all sorts of other alternate milk yogurts and kefir products these days.
Yeah.
I just bought a bottle of cashew milk kefir. Haven't tried it yet. I'll let you guys know later, but plenty of other ways you can get those easy fermented things, but they're pricey.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Yep. That's true.
Yeah. All right. Well, hope that helps everybody. A little bit of a discussion about pros and cons of dairy. Hope you can find something in this discussion that applies for you. If you hear anything that resonates, please drop a comment below the post. We would love to hear what people are thinking about this, and we will reply to keep the conversation going. All right. All right, Dr. P, thank you for joining us today. This is Dr. B signing off from Point Counterpoint. We will see you next week.